listening to Into the Arena, a Hunger Games podcast sparking the fandom one episode at a time, with your hosts, Holly and Emily. Special thanks for music by Sam Cushion.
Welcome back, tributes, to episode 26 of Into the Arena. I'm Emily.
And I'm Holly.
And this week, in honor of last week being the ALA's Banned Books Week, we are going to be talking about The Hunger Games and how it has been a banned book in the past. So we're excited to get into that discussion. But a couple of announcements. We have a very, very exciting episode coming up. We are going to be interviewing Maya Nguyen, who, if you haven't heard of her, get ready for some amazingness, because Maya is someone who's well known in the fandom. She is a singer-songwriter. She did her own interpretations of the songs in Ballad, and they are amazing. They're wonderful. I've listened to them so many times, but we have the exciting opportunity to ask her some questions. So I think it's going to be a really exciting episode, and we just wanted to let you all know to tune in 2 weeks.
Yay! Oh my goodness.
And then our other announcement, just our normal stuff. So we have another trivia coming up. We're going to be doing it on October 23rd. We're going to do it sometime during the day. Not sure exactly what time yet. But just kind of to let our international fans participate as well.
Yeah.
And then we're continuing our Mockingjay Mondays with the Hunger Games. So we're going to be doing chapters 7 and 8 tomorrow night. So join us for that.
Love it. So much Hunger Games. I love it.
I feel like there's always so much stuff going on.
And it makes me so happy. Like, we had our Mockingjay Part 1 watch along last weekend, which was so fun.
It was.
I think what's so fun about this is, like, you and I came together to, like, create this podcast, but what makes it even more fun is just being able to interact with all the other fans. So
I know, the community, the friends. So I mean, if you're not following us on Instagram, we're most active there. Yeah. So give us a follow at Into the Arena Podcast and join the community, join the fun.
Yay! Today's episode is gonna be so much fun, and a lot, like, I would say, pretty different from any of our other episodes that we've done before.
And I feel like I did a lot of research for
this. I know, one. Yeah. Emily's outline for this, I was like, wow, I'm like a proud teacher right now.
So let's talk about Banned Books Week. If you don't know, it was put together by the ALA, so the American Library Association. And I grabbed this from their website. They said, Banned Books Week is an annual event celebrating the freedom to read. Typically, it's held during the last week of September, and it spotlights current and historical attempts to censor books in libraries and schools. It brings together the entire book community, so librarians, booksellers, publishers, journalists, teachers, and readers of all types, in shared support of the freedom to seek and to express ideas, even those some consider unorthodox or unpopular. So in doing this research, I kind of went back to the history of the top 10 most challenged books list that the ALA puts out every year. And so I kind of looked back to see, what years was Hunger Games on the list and where was it on the list. So, and I had to put this on here too. In 2009, Twilight was on the list, and that's the only year in all the years past that Twilight was anywhere on the list. So we're not going to talk about Twilight, but
that's very surprising that Twilight was only on it once.
Twilight tangent, of course, we got to have it. But
Always.
Twilight was number 5 on the list for religious viewpoint, sexually explicit content, and being unsuited to the age group. I'm like, when is Twilight sexually explicit?
During Breaking Dawn. During their honeymoon scene?
The first Twilight book, because this was in 2009, so...
Oh, I know.
Well, Breaking Dawn was out, but clearly it was because of the Twilight movie.
There's just haters. That's literally what it is.
There's always haters.
Of course.
This whole podcast episode is going to be about the Hunger Games haters.
Yes, seriously.
So the first year that Hunger Games was on the list, it was at number 5, and it was in 2010. So that would have been 2 years after the book came out. So I'm assuming that this means it was challenged a lot in 2009, The list came out in 2010, so that was like a year after the book had been out. So it's gaining popularity, and the reasons were that it was sexually explicit, unsuited to the age group, and that there was violence. It appeared again the next year, and it moved up to number 3 on the list, and this time it was for the whole trilogy. So at this point, the whole series was out. This is like the long, ridiculous list to me in 2011, that it's anti-ethnic, anti-family, that there's insensitivity, it has offensive language, is occult/satanic, and violence. In 2013, this was the last year that The Hunger Games was on the list. It was at number 5, and the reasons were religious viewpoint and unsuited to age group. So it's interesting that it hasn't been on the list since 2013, because after that, the movies were still coming out.
And the book is still being taught in schools. Obviously not as much as it was when the franchise was really big, but it's still a classroom read for young adults.
Right. And like, this is just the top 10 list. So it could be 15, 20 on the list. Kind of makes me sad that it's not on the list anymore, because it means it's not as popular.
Stop. Maybe Ballad will make it. We'll see.
Okay, so let's just like go through some of these. So like, what is the content in the Hunger Games trilogy that's being challenged, that was brought up? So sexually explicit, like that's one of the reasons that was given.
I have so many things to say. How? Where? What, like, are they reading fan fiction? Like, what fan fiction are you reading, if so? Because
they're reading like in between the lines at the end of Mockingjay when everybody thinks. So after.
Well, it's like, Katniss and Peeta have kids, okay. Yeah, what? And then
sexually explicit.
Oh, okay. Like, you can have kids. But for me, it's like all of the Hunger Games, the first book, Katniss talks about how grossed out she is by the human body. And the times that we hear from her perspective about a naked body are when she's getting treated at the remake center, when she's like physically like getting changed into outfits with Cinna, and when Peeta's leg gets cut off and she has to like take off his pants, which is not sexual because
it's only when Peeta's like, oh, I don't care if you see me. That's the sexually explicit content, folks.
And then like 12-year-old me was not thinking about that. So I mean, I find that so hard to fight for. So
I know, it's so funny. I mean, it's just making me think of what we read in our read along this last week, where Katniss is like naked in front of Cinna, but like the nudity is never, it's not in a sexual context at all.
In a human context, talking about her,
it's like, is the word
bodily functions
nudity sexually explicit? No.
So, and I mean,
some parents think it is, I guess.
Well, even looking further into the trilogy, like Catching Fire, we have Finnick mentioned, and in Mockingjay, there's only like hints about him being prostituted by Snow. So it's like, again, these aren't like huge parts of the plot.
I guess I can kind of understand it in that context of Mockingjay, because I mean, it is of a sexual nature, but at the same time, that's also like not what it was on the list for. Like, this was for the first Hunger Games book. So
but the next one, violence, obviously I can understand parents being mad about the violence.
I can understand the violence one.
I'll
There's
accept
a lot of violence in the Hunger Games,
and the games where children are forced to kill each other, so there is violence.
and some pretty gruesome details. I mean, I feel like Suzanne Collins goes into depth of detail in a lot of different things, like the same way. So like, as much as she's describing the food in so much detail, she's also describing the violence. Actually, she might describe the food in more detail than the violence. And I'm thinking about like that part with Cato.
That part's awful.
It's pretty bad.
So I mean, definitely can understand that. And I can understand a parent's perspective for a younger adult who is trying to read The Hunger Games.
Yeah, so I mean the violent content, I mean it's kids killing kids. Suzanne doesn't shy away from it. It's definitely in there.
Which was honestly something I always thought about when I first read The Hunger Games and was absolutely obsessed with it. And we are at like the heart of all the movies coming out, all the excitement. Like my personality was the girl who loved The Hunger Games. And so for me, I was like, people must think I'm so weird because this is literally just a book about kids killing each other. Like how do you tell your grandparents like what you want for Christmas? Like I want stuff from The Hunger Games. Like it's this book series where kids kill each other. Like don't worry about me, grandma, you know? So that was something I always thought about.
Yeah, I can definitely remember like having to explain what The Hunger Games is about to like my grandparents.
And being like, I promise it's not awful. I'm not a bad human.
It's like, but like here it is, but like it's not really about that. It's about
Yeah.
this.
Exactly.
Okay, so anti-ethnic. This one just like baffles me.
I mean, I think the movies
don't
would be
understand.
because I mean, like we whitewashed our whole cast.
Mm,
But I mean,
comments have been made.
in the book, like Katniss is a woman of color, you know, like, and there's different parts to people's ethnicities and their backgrounds. And so I would definitely argue that this has nothing to do with being anti-ethnic.
Yeah, we've even had conversations before about how Suzanne kind of shied away from talking about race or really making that the forefront
Mm-hmm.
of any of the themes of the book. I mean, it's still there. There's undertones, but to make way for other things she wanted to talk about, like class
Mm-hmm.
instead. So this one I don't really see. I wish we could see what the actual complaints were.
Yeah.
Like what specific parts, but these people probably didn't read the book.
I know. I don't know. It's just annoying. The next one is anti-family, which at first I was like, I don't believe it. But the argument comes from Katniss being raised by a single mother because her father is literally dead. So it's anti-family because of the family dynamics that Katniss grows up within. So
And like for me, I mean, I've always talked about how the family part of it is like the biggest theme that resonates with me in the entire trilogy. So the relationship between sisters, Katniss and Prim, is what I love so much about the stories. So it's like so much about family for me. So the fact that it's anti-family, that could be a complaint, that's hard for me to take in.
Well, I also think it's so hard because when you read a lot of YA dystopia or sci-fi, I feel like the family dynamic is always the same. I feel like there's always a mom and dad who sacrifice themselves in the end, and there's always an older brother character to a younger sister, or the main character is like a male and then he has a brother. Like I don't know, that's always like the dynamic that I get. It's always like
Well,
a
yeah,
nuclear family.
like a lot of times parents are not a part of the equation, and that's on purpose. It's a
Yeah.
plot device. Like that's what happens in YA because you can't have the parents there. I think we've talked about this before. You can't have the parents there to solve the problems for the kids, or else how are the kids going to be the central part of the story and do whatever they're gonna do? Like
Amen.
it just doesn't make any sense. Like it's a plot device. Authors do it on purpose. It's intentional.
And then offensive language. I think if
Does it say
anything,
damn in the Hunger Games?
but I think that's it. I don't, there's no F word, no S word, no, I don't think that there's anything. I think if anything, there might have been one S word.
I'm gonna look because I can't remember.
I think maybe hell.
No results for damn were found. No results for shit were found. I'll just go through all the words.
What about hell? Look up hell.
I'm getting all the hellos.
Oh,
Yeah, no, hell is in there
it is.
quite a few times. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so
a lot of times. So that's the word.
the fact that it's not like intense, explicit profanity, like it's hell. You know, that's not blocked on.
Yeah, like one of these.
Television shows.
He's been through hell and back.
Yes. Like,
Well,
it's not even used to,
it's a fact. He's been through crap and back.
yeah, like, what are you supposed to say?
Okay, but I mean, I guess that's a true statement that there is offensive language. There are
Yes.
bad words in the Hunger Games.
Yes. The one that I am most confused about and I want to learn more is how the Hunger Games is a satanic book.
I think it's just like the principle of children killing children, and but I don't understand in the context how it's like, yes, it's an awful thing, comes from an evil place,
Mhm.
but it's a story about being against that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just more evil than the occult. I mean, isn't that like witchcraft?
Is it? I don't know.
I think so. Or, in that vein. It's like, what?
Katniss is a
It'd be like,
witch.
it'd be like dark magic.
Voodoo. It's Dr. Gall.
It's Dr. Gall. Now, Dr. Gall uses science, excuse me.
But I believe that she's a witch. So get you ready for Halloween.
And then the religious viewpoint. I think this is the one I get the least
Yeah.
out of all of them. Because
just that
religion is never mentioned.
I think that's what it is. I think the fact
That there is no religion.
yeah, that upsets. Usually, I mean, I'm making like an assumption, but usually it is a religious family who would say like it's going against a religious viewpoint because there is no mention of it.
This book lacks any religion or morals, so
Okay.
complaining because it's missing something. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
well, go find the book that has whatever you're looking
Yes,
for.
exactly.
What?
It's not like it goes against, like, the book never says anything against a particular religion or belief at all. Just by not having it and having like an absence of religion, it's a crime and we should ban the book.
And then the last one, Unsuited to Age Group. I mean, I guess this was just filed if, like, let's say it was in elementary school and they thought it shouldn't, it should only be in middle school above or something like that.
It
or
makes
middle
sense.
school and, it should only be in high school or something like that. So just inappropriate to the age.
I guess that leads us into our question, like, what age did you put down as appropriate for people to read the Hunger Games? Like, at what age?
I mean, it's so hard to like give an exact, because every kid's different, right? But I would say as a general rule, with obviously room for, maybe the kid's not really ready, or maybe the kid is ready to read it before that, but I'd say 7th grade is kind of the age of reading the Hunger Games.
Yeah, I said personally, I think someone ages like 10 to 12, which would be like likely like end of 5th to 6th grade. But I don't know how much I understand because I mean, this is my own perspective. I read the books at that age and like I obviously understood the book and the books, but I mean, going back as an older teenager and young adult, I was able to realize there were a lot of things that I missed when I was younger reading it.
I think for me, it's like 7th grade. Like, I'm sure, I mean, you did read it and were mostly mature enough to read it, I guess. I mean, you've said that there's some things that you like didn't quite grasp, but I would say more as like a general rule. Like, I would give it to a 7th grader with probably no reservations. But if they were younger than that, I would maybe think about it a little bit more.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
And like Scholastic, they even mark it as 12 to 16, which, why put the cap at 16? Excuse me.
I'm like, 22.
I read the book at 16. Yeah, I read the book at 16. So I just barely made it in to the appropriate age range.
You're too old and I was too young. So there we go.
Yeah, it's so interesting. We're on the different ends of the spectrum. 12 is
6th grade.
6th
It's
grade?
like,
I was 11 in 6th grade.
well, it depends on when your birthday is. Like end of 5th grade, 6th grade, and then beginning of 7th. But then you're a later birthday.
In June. So I'm the same for a school year. I was always the same. So I was 11 in 6th grade.
I'm like trying to do math. I'm like, we're very different. Very different.
Watch us calculate this in our heads.
But for me, I was always like jealous to hear of classes that got to read the Hunger Games. I
know,
didn't get to read
right?
it.
Yeah, because I was like a junior in high school when I read it. So we definitely weren't reading the Hunger Games in class.
Well, I could have, and it never happened.
You
So
could have.
I could have. I could
What
have
could
taught
have
the
been?
class.
I thought it was interesting. So I found in an article talking about like banned books and the violence in the Hunger Games, there was a study by the University of Michigan that said the average American child witnesses 200,000 violent acts and 16,000 murders via television by the time they turn 18.
Wow.
I wonder when that like starts. I mean, that same
Mhm.
article was saying that there's cartoon violence. So a lot of that could be in like cartoons where it's just like silly, where it's like, oh, is it like not real or like,
Yeah. No, I totally got you.
is it there's a permanency to it and like how
Mhm.
graphic is it and everything. But
Mhm.
it just seems like at a certain point, you can't really shield your child
No.
from these things. So I'm like, isn't it better to have them experience these things in a way that might be constructive to them or have them think about these things in a new way than just like what they might see on TV, which could be just senseless. And then it also said that children under the age of 8 cannot differentiate between fantasy and reality in general,
Yeah.
which I thought was really interesting. So I'm like, okay, well, definitely 8 and below, like you wouldn't want to give them the Hunger Games
No.
because they wouldn't be able to comprehend, what's reality and I could totally understand that being way too much for a
Mhm.
kid. 9, 10, 11 is like the like gray area.
Mhm. That's what I was about to say. Like for me, it's just interesting that people can always make these generalizations, obviously, but like you said, it comes down to each individual. And so then it's hard. Like you said, you would feel comfortable giving this book to a seventh grade class, but if it was a sixth grade class, it's like you have to think about it. And so again, we're just always making general assumptions about what kids should be reading. Maybe somebody is ready to read it in the fourth grade versus maybe someone's not ready to read it until they're a junior in high school. So it really just depends on the person too, which I find so interesting about parents who will report books or challenge a book in a class because that's one kid versus unless a bunch of parents are saying this is not for my child to be reading.
Let's jump into some of the actual cases.
Mm-hmm.
So our first one, we probably share these links in like the episode description.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys can look at them too. Although you probably heard some of them because at least one of these I feel like was pretty well-known case like in the fandom. I remember
Yeah.
reading about it a while back. This first article, schools debate educational value of the Hunger Games.
This is from the Seattle Times. And it was really interesting. There was one quote that I pulled from it because the gist that I took from the article was it really depends on the context in which you teach this book in, which is true because I mean, if you're just putting this book out there and saying it's so great, like let's just talk about all the deaths and all the violence, like let's talk about the tributes, let's talk about that, you're not talking about the themes and the good versus bad, the everything underneath it. But there was one quote that I just like picked out, and it says Jessica Burns of the Soundview School, a private K through 12 in Linwood, said the method of selecting participants in the games is used to illustrate statistics lessons. I never thought of the Hunger Games in a statistics
Yeah,
class. That was something that I was like,
interesting.
you always hear it being taught like in an English class, in an English setting. So to hear in a math class, that's something where I would have almost questioned it. Like it'd be a cool pop culture reference to make as a teacher. But then again, it's like K through 8. Like if there's so many other ways that you can teach statistics and method and like sampling. You know what I mean? So that was when I was kind of like, it depends. Like, are you teaching like
I mean, I think that's cool because it's like you're not actually reading the book, right? And so you're not
Mhm.
getting into like the nitty-gritty of like maybe the violence and all the things that would be challenged, I guess. But if you get the reference, it makes math more fun.
Yeah, it does make math more fun. But like K through 8, so let's think. Was she teaching 6th through 8th grade, hopefully?
Kindergartners.
Have you guys seen the trailer for the Hunger Games movie?
One tribute plus one tribute equals two tributes.
I love that.
As a data analyst, I'm like, yeah. I wish I used Hunger Games to learn statistics.
Come
Sounds
on.
great.
I
Sign me up.
love that.
I also read in that article, it was interesting. There was one father who said that it was a 5th grade class reading the book, and he wasn't sure if it was appropriate. And that
Mhm.
honestly, like just what we were talking about right now. I mean, you were talking about one student versus like the entire class. I don't know. I feel like if my student was in a class in 5th grade reading the Hunger Games, I just feel like that's a little bit young, and like
Yeah.
that does have some legitimacy to it, that
Mhm.
maybe it's not suitable for the age group. And I don't know if I would just want to pull my one child out of the class. I think I'd be like, is this right for
It
the
makes sense.
entire age group? On the book, it says 12 to 16.
Mhm.
I'm like, that's 5th grade's young.
Well, I also thought an interesting part of this article was classes that were planning to take kids in the class to see the movie. Because
Mm,
I feel like it's one thing to watch the movie versus to read the book. Because in the book, you can pick up on so many themes and ideas and thoughts and messages that Suzanne wants you to get. But in the movie, it's going to be more glamorized, and the killing is going to be more, I mean, Hollywood. And so I don't know, there's just a different
Wasn't that a
lesson to
6th grade
learn.
class too?
Yeah, to take them on a field trip to go see the Hunger Games.
Yeah, see, and I'm like, I'm worried about the book, 5th grade. So
Hmm.
upping it to the movie just in 6th grade. I mean, the movie's PG-13.
Hmm.
How are they even getting kids to? I mean, I guess they were
True,
signing permission slips.
but
Like, see, that to
still,
me, it's like, why would you do a class field trip for a PG-13 movie for a class full of kids that are under 13?
that's very true. That's very true.
What?
Yeah.
You're totally right. Like when you see it visually and then you don't have the context. I mean, maybe they were reading it as a class and everything, but just
Hmm.
that seems like a little bit much to me.
Yeah.
We're so
And
strict at
I know. I'm
I
like, I don't
am.
know
I
how I'm gonna
feel
be a
like
mother.
I'm just like I don't know if you're gonna agree with me on these things, Holly, because I feel like I do tend to side with parents as much as possible, like
Hmm.
in these situations,
I will if they're not arguing that it's
if it
because of
makes
the sexual
sense.
content.
Yeah, for stuff
Because
that
that
doesn't
doesn't
even
make sense.
exist, or
Yeah.
like not even reading the book.
See, at the same time, like I think with that quote that you just mentioned a few minutes ago about how much violence kids are introduced to by the time that they're 18, I mean, it's almost like this wouldn't be like of shock to parents and to children if this was now taught 10 years later. Because I feel like there's so much violence in mainstream media that maybe it wouldn't be as big of a concern now, a decade later.
It's kind of like the Hunger Games can be an entry point
Mhm.
to violence.
Yeah.
And it's like at what age is that, what is age is that point where you can be exposed to that?
But also it's like Suzanne wrote Ballad because she really wanted to put the nail in the coffin about what perspective we're reading this from and what we were really taking from the books, because
Hmm.
people love the Hunger Games, people love Catching Fire because of the games. You read the books for the games. You see the movies for the games, and that's why people didn't love Mockingjay, the movies or the book. And so I think it's hard because at a young age, you don't know the difference of either like glamorizing and respecting this idea or understanding the actual morals behind it. So I think that's a good question about like when is the right time for somebody.
Which the Hunger Games can be that like tool to help you understand. Okay, let's talk about the second article that we have, the second case, the big one,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Like I remember when this, I think like was first happening, or it had just come out. Like I read the Hunger Games in 2010, and I think this was around 2010
Yeah,
that
2010.
this happened. Um, so it was in New Hampshire, and it was a parent that she had a daughter in class that was at 7th grade.
Her 11-year-old.
Oh, 11-year-old. Okay, so like 6th grade middle school. And her 11-year-old had nightmares, apparently, from reading The Hunger Games, which it was a book that they were reading as a class.
Sounds like a personal problem.
Yeah, I know. We just
That's
talked
so-
about too that like 11 is definitely like on the cusp
Mhm.
of like being able to handle the Hunger Games or not, I think. But I did like highlight this one quote, which I thought was really good. This challenge, which comes on the heel of the American Library Association's Banned Book Week, is a cautionary tale other parents should note. When a parent a book being taught, a lot of school districts say a parent can take a child out, and a lot of parents have an objection to that, say their child is being singled out, but you've already singled your child out by taking them out, and no parent has a right to select the curriculum. Which I'm like, yeah, I feel that. I mean, like, they don't want their child to be singled out about like being different and not being allowed to be included in whatever it is. But it's like, as the parent, you're the one singling them out by taking them out of whatever it is.
Mhm.
And I just kind of feel that because, like, I definitely had that happen to me in elementary school with the Harry Potter books. My parents didn't want us reading them.
Yeah.
And I remember being much younger, like second grade, and being like singled out, having to go to the library and sit alone by myself while
Aw.
the class, read aloud Harry Potter.
Mhm.
But I mean, I eventually read Harry Potter, like it's fine.
Yeah.
And I definitely like side with my parents on that decision because, it's the parents' responsibility to decide how their child is raised and like what media they're exposed to or not exposed to as a child.
Mhm.
So I'm totally cool with that. And that's what happened. So it's like in this case, you were saying earlier, one student versus the whole class, one parent doesn't get to decide that for other parents.
Mhm.
They don't get to decide what other kids are exposed to or not, just for their child themselves. So if the student was having nightmares, then they're removed from that situation, and that really should be the end of it.
And yeah, and there shouldn't be any negative connotation around that decision or that child or that parent, because I think it's interesting that you have that perspective, because my parents were like the opposite. So they kind of just trusted the school and saying like, now's the time to read this, now is the time to read this. And so I mean, I would see kids whose parents didn't agree with the different ratings, have them go out and go to the library or go
Mm.
silently read. And I mean, it, like you say, I totally respect that it's up to the parents and it's up to the individual family. And it shouldn't be that big of a deal. If you don't want your kids to read it, then just tell the teacher, no big deal. Because I didn't look at the kids any differently. I don't know. I don't think you looked at anyone any differently. Like you said, you got to read the books at one point. So it's
People
all.
might have looked at me differently. I don't
I
know.
didn't. I was just like, okay, have
There's that
fun.
sad girl not getting to experience Harry Potter.
But then you did, and now you're
But
a
then
Harry
I
Potter
did.
fan. So
Yeah.
it's like, I think as long as it comes down to there being a justification and a good justification as to why this book is being used in a classroom, then by all means, like, teach it. Because if not, if you're just saying, oh, this is a really badass book and there's a bunch of kids that get into this arena and they like kill each other, it's so
Mhm.
graphic, it's so
And
horrible.
what gets me is like that's basically this case, right?
Yeah.
Of this lady with her daughter. I mean,
Hmm.
okay, like the daughter had a bad experience, like that's totally valid, had nightmares, don't read the Hunger Games anymore.
Hmm.
But she was basically saying the main character, well, first of all, this is false information. The main character is the only one of 24 children that survives in the book. Clearly didn't
No.
read the book.
She's like, she read the synopsis online. She's like, what is this? That's what I imagine
And
these
that
these
the
parents
children are
doing.
being killed for entertainment, pitted against one another in a game, and was questioning what this book teaches as far as like honor, ethics, and morals. She said that there's no lesson in this book except if you're a teenager and kill 23 other teenagers, you win the game and your family wins.
I know. I was like, okay. There's definitely angry parents out there like that.
She said at the time that she had read the book.
See, if I were a parent and like someday down the line, maybe I'll be a parent. When my children will be reading a book, I just fully expect to like understand. I mean, maybe that's just because I like to read, but when my kids will be reading a book in the future, chances are I will be reading it with them. Like I want to know what they're reading.
No, I think that's completely valid. I feel like, and that's kind of a question that I had written for us to discuss, like whose responsibility is it that a child is engaging with age appropriate content? And it's the parents' responsibility
Yeah.
in my view. And I mean, I do feel like librarians and teachers have some responsibility to kind of know the teacher, probably to know the student, and the librarian to know a fair amount of the books and the content in them, and both can make recommendations based on what they know of the student and the books, but ultimately it's the parents' responsibility to, I think, know what their child is reading.
Yeah. Yeah. Snaps for that. Amen.
I'm just like, it seems so hard to be a parent and like
I
make these
know.
decisions and figure this stuff out. And I feel like there should be more room for, like, parents should be, if not reading entire books, because like I understand that's hard, but
Looking it
looking at
up.
reviews,
Yes.
reading excerpts, finding out what these books are really about, and instead of just saying, oh, you can't read this, or yeah, this is fine to read, like really engaging with their child.
Yes.
and knowing what their child is reading.
Read the spark notes on these books. There's the spark notes for the Hunger Games. You can read the themes, the content. Like
I really hope
going
if my
on.
kids, if I ever have kids, I hope they're readers, because I'll
Oh,
be
me
so
too.
sad
I'm like, you
if
better be
they're
collecting
not.
all
Because
my
I'm like,
books.
this is the main way that I would engage like
Yes.
with my children and connect with them. So you just gotta you gotta start reading to them early.
I'm gonna be the crazy mom that like I've already talked about this. My kids will not own iPads, they will own Kindles. Like you are only gonna know how to read. That is not allowed.
Sometimes I forget that like kids have access to that stuff now,
Oh, I
like that they have iPads and they have
I'm
all
like,
this technology
yeah.
that I did not have as a child, and I'm like, parenting seems so hard in this
I
day and
know.
age.
I'm like, go outside and play like I did. I used to play like Scooby Doo outside. I used to play H2O mermaids outside. Like
Me going
kids should be doing
outside
that.
and playing fake
Hunger
Hunger
Games.
Games.
Yes. Same. Me eating grass. But should we just jump to the question about should books ever be banned?
Yeah. What do you think, Holly? Should books
I
ever be banned?
I said no, no, no. No, 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 no. They should include warnings and descriptions and perhaps age guidances, but you should never ban a book.
Okay, can we talk about that? Because in college, I wrote a whole research paper on why books should have ratings when they don't. Because as someone who is a reader, like there was even, I mean, I self moderated like what I wanted to read, because I was like, okay, well, I don't really want to read like this level of gore or like, anything graphic personally. But I found it so hard, especially, I guess, when I was younger, there was no like, it wasn't as much internet. So it was very hard to figure out what was in a book before I actually read it. And I was like, I really wish there was some sort of rating system, or at the very least, actually more what I would have liked rather than a rating system, because I feel like that could get weird, would be some sort of description of like what's in the book.
Can I just talk about how I feel like that's been solved with TikTok? Because I think
Okay.
I would
Talk.
argue that Book Talk has added a lot of that on. I mean, for me, like I know I don't read all the books on Book Talk that people talk about, but I'll find book recommendations based on how they're like, read the warnings, read this. They'll give a brief description. They'll rate it like on spiciness or on like violence. And so for me, I think that that's been really helpful for me, is as going from young adult reader to adult reader, like gauging what kinds of books I want to read and having people who are actively reading different types of books, similar books to me, giving me that description. So that's what I love about Book Talk. I love Book Talk.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't really think about it but also like for a parent
Well, yeah,
to
but
be
for
able to
me, I'm
like
like,
see
I want
that
to know
information. Like for
how
myself, yeah, it's
spicy is this
fine.
romance gonna be? You know, how many red peppers
We
are we
gotta
giving
know.
it? Yeah. So for me, that's just been a fun thing, like being a part of like a reading and like a book community, seeing that because I
Hmm.
mean at the library they'll have like or bookstores they'll have like recommendations and like the whole section with like what the booksellers or librarians are recommending in a brief description and who's it for. But that's only on a select amount of books. I mean, I've been introduced to so many books outside the mainstream
Hmm.
book talk books from book talk. So
But that's the thing. Then, like, are is that information going to be available for books that are not as popular? So
yeah.
I still think it would be nice for books to have some sort of, I mean, you know how when there's like the rating on a movie and then it describes why. I just want the
Mhm.
describes why part, like on the
But
book.
then it becomes bad because
I know,
as
because then
someone who studied
everybody's
film
gonna want to
studies,
like assign some sort of rating to that. I don't know if you can get away with that happening without having a rating system. And I don't want a rating system on books
mhm,
because I think that's going to cause a lot of problems.
it goes back to like 1940s Hollywood, like putting all these different movies, like pretty much blackmailing and or blackballing all these movies, all these actors based on like what one group of a specific religious group, specific like um, class, race group would put a rating on a certain movie.
Yeah,
So
it would just end up resulting in restricted books. And I
yes,
do not want that.
but yeah. So what do you say about you say that books should not be banned, but they should include descriptions or
I was kind of thinking, yeah, that would be like my dream, which I
Mhm.
feel like is not ever going to be reality. I would like to know the contents of books
Yeah.
before I read them and just have that in a really easily accessible format.
Mhm.
But I don't know, I was kind of thinking about like the age thing with Hunger Games and I guess it's not so much being banned as like the elementary school example, a librarian would be responsible for what books are purchased for the library, right?
Mhm.
So I kind of feel like maybe at the elementary school level, the Hunger Games should not be in the elementary school library.
Mhm. And then again, kids can go to their public library if
Yeah, I
there
mean,
is
they
one
can
near
get
them,
it,
you know.
through other means because, I mean, especially because then much younger kids would be there to access it. Like, a second grader could check
Mhm.
out the Hunger Games theoretically, and I really don't think that's ever a good idea.
Yeah,
I
no.
mean, if the parent lets them, whatever, but
Yeah,
yeah, so
definitely.
banned, not really, but I definitely think there are situations where like certain books should not be in certain schools. I guess like one quote that I found that I kind of wanted to read as sort of a closing statement. This was an article from the Literature for Adolescents journal, and the article was called Gore in Young Adult Fiction. It was a very interesting
Wow.
article about how like gore serves a purpose in young adult literature. And there are several books that I absolutely love that have quite a bit of gore in them. Um, but so it definitely has its place. But there was just this quote by the author Robin Kirk that said, kind of in conclusion, a lot of young people read because they're looking for books with stories and characters they feel a connection to. And the sad truth is that many of us have had some really bad things happen in our lives. Sometimes the trauma of those negative experiences diminishes over time, but you still never get over it. For a lot of us, there is really no happily ever after. That's just how life is. When the only thing readers get are books with happy endings, in which all problems are perfectly solved, with plenty of rising above and triumph for the protagonists, it has a consequence of making some kids feel that there must be something wrong with them, that they're to blame for not having everything work out beautifully in their lives. There's something profound and also contradictory about young adults. Adults tend to romanticize those years and forget about how deeply challenging they are for anyone actually living them. At the same time, children experience the metaphorical and too often actual horrors of growing up without any perspective, thus making events like bullying or crimes otherworldly, out of control, and literally life-threatening.
Wow.
And I just feel like that was a really good quote
Yeah,
about
that's an amazing
like
quote.
why we need bullying, crime, violence, these awful things in young adult books. And I feel like that quote especially even speaks to like Mockingjay and
Mhm.
how the book ends, and Katniss is not in this happily ever after
Mhm.
state like maybe some people might have liked. It's just very real. And I think having something like the Hunger Games with these life or death stakes, you know, when you're young, a lot of things feel life or death, even
Mhm.
if they're not. And so I think that helps kids connect and relate to these characters. And as long as a child is old enough to think through these things more critically and maybe even like discuss with a parent or an adult or discuss in the classroom about the themes in the book, and that it's not all just gratuitous violence, that it means something, that I feel like it's important.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's an amazing point about young adults creating all these events in their lives as being the end of the world or a life and death situation. So I think that's so accurate.
And the point about adults romanticizing their
Mhm.
younger years too. I feel like adults tend to forget what kids can handle and what it is like to be a kid.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that we did this episode because I
Yeah,
feel
this
like
is good, I thought.
we got to talk about kind of the darker side of the Hunger Games and the effect that it's had on readers, young readers, families, parents, teachers. And I'm interested to know, anyone watching or
Mhm.
listening, if you read the Hunger Games in a classroom setting. Like, I'm really interested if you did that, what
I feel like
age
we
you
should
read the
do a
books.
poll
Yeah.
on Instagram or something about if you read the books in the classroom or not, and like kind of what age you read them at, like 10, 11, 12, or older.
16. But yeah,
Me.
because, and I also want to hear what people have to say. I mean, if you're a parent, I'd love
Mhm.
to hear your thoughts because obviously Emily and I aren't parents and we don't have that perspective. But again, I think that this has a lot of valuable learning lessons for all of us.
And I feel like I
And
had some strong opinions in this
oh, yeah.
episode. So if you disagree with me, like, Emily, you're crazy.
Then attack Emily. Not kidding. I will protect Emily with my life. Until next time, I mean, check us out on Mockingjay Monday tomorrow for chapter 7 and 8 of the Hunger Games. And come visit us 2 weeks from now for an amazing, awesome, so cool episode
I
with
know,
Maya
get
Lynn.
excited for Maya.
Yay! And we'll see you soon.
See ya.